Evelyn Hart was 77 years old, a former combat medic, a woman who once sprinted through gunfire in Iraq to save lives no one remembers, but she never needed them to. These days, she rode an old bicycle through Fairview, Texas, her back slightly hunched, her presence quiet. Most people barely noticed. Until one scorching afternoon, her bike chain snapped outside the Iron Vulture's biker bar, a place where loud engines drowned out conscience and respect had to be earned the hard way. She fell, scraped her hands, tried to fix it herself, but instead of help, she got laughter. Phones were raised, comments flew. An old woman with a broken bike became free entertainment for a bar full of bystanders who had no idea who they were mocking. What they didn't know was that Evelyn had once carried dying soldiers out of roadside bomb craters with her bare hands. She'd survived blasts, blood, and silence from a government that forgot her name the moment she came home. And now this mockery from her own neighbors. But then Mac Dalton stepped out, the leader of the Iron Vultures, 6'4", leather vest, a man whose stare could silence a room. He didn't laugh. He knelt beside her, picked up the chain, and said only one word, "Ma'am." In that moment, the bar went quiet, because respect wasn't demanded. It was given by the only man whose approval the rest of them feared losing. That afternoon didn't just fix a bicycle, it rewired a town's sense of decency, and the woman they once laughed at became the person they now whispered about with something they hadn't felt in years. Respect. Where are you watching this from? Have you ever seen someone dismissed until the truth about who they were hit harder than any punch? Drop your city or country in the comments. And if Evelyn's story hit home, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that remind us real strength doesn't roar. It rolls in quietly and changes everything. Under the suffocating haze of a Texas summer afternoon, the Iron Vulture's biker bar loomed like a fortress of rusted steel and leather. It was the kind of place where strangers didn't linger, and respect was earned through scars and silence. Evelyn Hart, 67, former Navy corpsman, knew better than most to avoid such places. But that day she didn't get a choice. The chain on her battered bicycle snapped just as she rolled past the line of gleaming motorcycles, the old Schwinn jerking to a humiliating stop directly in front of the bar's open patio. The front wheel wobbled the weight of her canvas grocery bags, tipping her balance. She managed to steady herself, but not her dignity. Before she could even dismount, a chorus of laughter erupted from the crowd of bikers sprawled across sun-scorched benches. Someone whistled mockingly. Another shouted, "Wrong place to break down, ma'am." Phones came out almost in unison, screens reflecting the image of a weathered woman in cargo pants and a faded baseball cap fumbling with a broken chain. The live stream lit up within seconds. Comments flooded in harsh, unforgiving, and worse yet, viral. In the era of digital mockery, Evelyn had unknowingly become the star of the town's most humiliating sideshow. "Bet she fought harder battles than this old bike," someone sneered, zooming in on her trembling hands as she reached into her faded backpack for a rusty multi-tool. Evelyn didn't speak. She never did when the audience was the wrong kind. Her hands, steady once upon a time when tending to wounded soldiers in the chaos of Fallujah, now betrayed a slight tremor part, age part, frustration. She crouched by the crippled bicycle, her focus narrowing to the snapped chain, ignoring the ring of bikers enjoying the show. Her silence seemed only to provoke them more. They jeered louder, egged on by the digital audience swelling on the live stream. The comments scrolled fast. "Veteran discounts not working today." "Guess freedom ain't free, neither is a tow truck." The humiliations weren't just online now. A biker with sleeves of tattoos and a handlebar mustache kicked one of her grocery bags over, sending apples tumbling across the gravel. Another younger flicked a beer cap at her back. She ignored them all. She had endured far worse under enemy mortar fire. These punks had no idea what real fear tasted like. And yet something about the moment tasted worse than enemy territory. This was her own country, her own people, her own streets. And yet here she was, treated like refuse. The cameras circled her like predators around wounded prey. Evelyn gritted her teeth, focused on rethreading the chain, but her vision blurred as the heat pressed down, as the sneers pressed closer. She heard a phone notification chirp next to her ear. 1-500 watching now." Another biker moved closer, his phone practically shoved in her face. Smile for the internet, Grandma G.I. Jane. Evelyn finally spoke, her voice low, gritty. Move. But the demand was drowned out by laughter. The mob mentality was in full swing, now feeding off itself, growing meaner by the minute. They wanted a reaction. They wanted her to snap, to throw something, to curse, to give them a show. But Evelyn Hart refused to play their game. She adjusted the chain with calm, clinical hands, though her breath was growing labored. Her cap shadowed her face, but not enough to hide the silent storm behind her eyes. Somewhere in the crowd, a biker's girlfriend whispered, "Maybe we should stop this." But her voice was quickly drowned by another round of mockery as someone filmed Evelyn's groceries scattering across the asphalt. The scene had become a theater of cruelty, and she was the main act. What none of them noticed, what none of them cared to see, was the pair of boots stepping out from the shadow of the bar's interior. Heavy, deliberate, the kind of walk that silences even the most raucous laughter. The man paused in the doorway, letting the oppressive sunlight carve his silhouette against the gloom of the bar. The man had been watching the entire time, arms crossed, expression unreadable. And now he was moving toward the center of the circle. They didn't see him yet. They were too busy watching their screens, laughing at their feeds. But they were about to see him. The leader of the Iron Vultures himself. And when he stepped into the circle, the balance of the entire street would tilt on its axis. The predators would realize they were not at the top of the food chain anymore. The laughter grew meaner. What started as jokes had morphed into something darker, uglier. Evelyn crouched low, fixing her gaze on the fractured chain hands, greasy, and scraped from the jagged edges of the derailleur. She blocked out the jeers as best she could, but the vibrations of their mockery hung in the air like heat waves. It wasn't just the bikers on the patio anymore. People from the street had stopped to watch, phones held high, eager to capture a viral moment. Evelyn could hear them narrating her humiliation in real-time voices, gleeful tones, vicious. She tried to focus on threading the chain, but the crowd kept tightening their shadows, swallowing her whole. A beer bottle clinked near her head. Someone tossed it as a joke. Another biker flicked an old cigarette butt onto her pile of groceries, watching it smolder atop a crushed loaf of bread. One of the younger men, all attitude and cheap tattoos, sauntered up, grabbed her bag of apples, and poured them onto the cracked asphalt like confetti. The fruit rolled under boots, some bursting open under the deliberate stomp of steel-toed shoes. The laughter roared even louder, echoing against the bar's metal siding. The livestream audience ballooned by the second. The chat was a sewer of emojis, laughing faces, and cruel captions. "Grandma of the Year. Look at her, where's your medals now? Somebody get her a walker, not a bike." They didn't care who she was. They didn't want to know. They only saw an old woman in the wrong place, easy prey. What none of them realized was that the woman they turned into a sideshow had once pulled wounded Marines from burning vehicles under insurgent fire. Evelyn had sewn men back together under the scream of mortar rounds. She had whispered last rites into sand-caked ears while dodging snipers. But the crowd here wouldn't care about that. They only cared about feeding their hunger for cheap spectacle. They wanted a show, and they were getting it. Or so they thought. Evelyn's hands kept moving, disciplined, steady, despite the tremor. But the pain was creeping into her knees, the heat magnifying every ache, every old injury. She wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her arm, smearing it with grease and grit, her mouth pressed into a hard line. She wouldn't give them the meltdown they craved. She wouldn't let them win. The crowd grew restless, frustrated at her silence, her refusal to break. They escalated. One biker tipped her battered bike onto its side, sending the rest of her groceries crashing onto the pavement. The eggs cracked yolks leaking into the dirt. A jar of peanut butter shattered like a grenade. More laughter. More clicks. More posts. The scene became more than an embarrassment. It became a digital lynching one that no one would stop, not the passers-by, not the servers in the bar, not even the so-called decent folks watching from across the street with their heads down. No one wanted to intervene. No one wanted to be next on the live stream. Evelyn gathered her crushed items slowly, methodically, her face never betraying the volcano behind her stoic eyes. She stacked the broken pieces of her day with the care of a soldier collecting the remains of her fallen. Still they laughed. Still they filmed. It was as if cruelty had become the entertainment currency of the hour. The comments poured in. "This is comedy gold. America's finest folks. Where's the old bat's PTSD now?" But the crowd's laughter began to taper off when the temperature of the air seemed to change sharp as a blade. They didn't notice it at first, too caught up in the thrill of their digital kill. But Evelyn noticed. Her combat instincts picked it up before her ears did. A shift. A silence. It started like a vacuum sucking the oxygen from the scene. The mocking voices stumbled, confused by the sudden change in energy. Then the metal door of the bar creaked open, cutting through the tension like a gunshot. The bikers froze. Phones dropped to sides. Heads turned. The man in the doorway stepped forward with a deliberate slowness that spoke louder than any shout. Mac Dalton, the man who commanded the Iron Vultures with a stare alone, filled the threshold. The sneers dried up instantly. The crowd parted the pack of jackals, sensing the alpha had arrived. His boots scraped gravel as he crossed the patio. He wasn't in a hurry. He didn't need to be. His reputation did the walking. Evelyn looked up for the first time, locking eyes with him. She saw no malice there, only the look of a man who had seen enough. The balance of power shifted in a heartbeat, and the predators were about to find themselves prey. Mac Dalton stepped into the chaos like a storm front rolling over a sun-baked field. The laughter died mid-breath. The Iron Vultures, once boisterous, loud, and untouchable, found themselves suddenly and collectively holding theirs. Mac wasn't just the president of the club. He was the law of this patch of Texas. His boots, scuffed but solid, scraped across the gravel like the ticking hand of a doomsday clock. No one dared meet his eyes directly. Evelyn Hart did. From her crouched position among the ruins of her groceries and pride, she looked up at him unblinking. Mac's face, leathered from years on the road and battlefields of his own, was unreadable. He paused just inside the circle, the bikers parting for him, like waves from a prow. The tension shifted so violently the air itself seemed heavier. Without saying a word, he scanned the crowd. His gaze sliced through them, exposing the pathetic truth hiding behind their bravado. They weren't predators. Not really. They were kids poking at a caged animal, not realizing the bars had disappeared the moment Mac walked outside. He didn't speak yet. He didn't have to. His mere presence unraveled the mob's swagger, leaving only awkward shuffles and darting glances. The smartphones disappeared into pockets. The laughter dried up into uncomfortable throat clears and coughs. Someone near the back tried to melt into the shadows, but Mac's stare caught him mid-step, freezing him in place. Mac turned his attention to Evelyn's bike. Without asking, without ceremony, he bent down and lifted it from the gravel like it weighed nothing. He examined the broken chain, the bent derailleur, the scuffed frame. He rolled the bike toward the center of the patio, placing it atop a battered picnic table. Then finally his voice came low and rough, but carrying more weight than any yell could. "Line up." That was all he said. And yet it triggered instant movement. The bikers, men and women alike, scrambled into formation like soldiers before a general. The Iron Vultures didn't question Mac. They obeyed. The club was notorious for handling its own, for keeping outsiders out. But now the lines blurred. Now they stood in stiff, uneasy rows, awaiting orders, their smirks gone, replaced by something closer to shame. Evelyn remained on one knee, her breath steady, her expression locked behind the same mask she'd worn in combat zones. She didn't need to stand. Mac had already shifted the battlefield in her favor. The man moved closer to her now, slow and deliberate. She could smell the diesel and leather, but she didn't flinch. He stopped just a foot away, studying her face in the same detached manner he had given the bike. His gaze dipped lower to the thin silver chain hanging from her neck, half hidden beneath her shirt. Without asking permission, he reached down and lifted the dog tags into the afternoon light. The metal caught the harsh sun, the embossed letters worn but still legible. Mac didn't say a word. He let the tags rest in his palm for a moment, as if weighing them, letting them dangle there like a judge holding the scales. Evelyn stared at him unflinching, letting him read them in silence. The moment stretched long enough for sweat to bead on the foreheads of the assembled club members. The hook was clear now. When the most feared man in the county fixed his gaze on you, the party's over. No more jokes, no more games, only consequences. Mac lowered the tags slowly, gently back onto Evelyn's chest. His voice, when it returned, was softer but edged with cold steel. "You all forgot who you are today," he said, each word landing heavy. The bikers shifted uneasily, feet scraping gravel, ashamed but too stubborn to speak first. Mac turned back to the bike, then to Evelyn. His eyes paused on the tags again, but he held his tongue. There was more to this woman, and he wasn't going to let them off with just an apology. No. He would make them feel it. He would make them all stare into those tags and see what they had tried to erase. But that moment wasn't yet. That would come soon enough. The air sat heavy on the patio, thick as oil, suffocating in its silence. Mac Dalton didn't move right away. He let the weight of the moment press down on everyone present. The iron vultures stood rigid like statues in a bad war memorial, their postures sagging under the weight of their own shame. Evelyn Hart remained still, her expression carved from granite. She wasn't seeking their pity. She didn't want it. She had seen enough men crumble under pressure in war zones. These bikers weren't any different. They just hid their fears behind bravado and beer. Mac still held her dog tags in his hand, the metal warm from the sun and his calloused grip. He studied them longer this time, his brow furrowing deeper, the lines on his weathered face etching new chapters none of them could read yet. Finally, his voice broke the suffocating silence. But he didn't speak to the bikers. Not yet. Fallujah, he muttered almost to himself. The word floated across the patio like a curse, landing in the center of the gathered crew, igniting sparks of recognition in a few faces. But the youngest, cockiest member of the Vultures, Danny Reynolds, remained oblivious, arms crossed, tight scowl, fixed like armor. Mac's gaze sharpened, zeroing in on him. "Danny," he called, his voice flat, void of the usual bite, which somehow made it land even harder. Danny flinched, caught off guard, but quickly puffed his chest in a weak attempt to recover. "Yeah, boss." Mac turned the dog tags so the letters faced the crowd, letting the afternoon light dance across the stamped name. He spoke louder now, ensuring no one missed a word. "Evelyn Hart, United States Navy, corpsman, served Iraq, Fallujah." The name sliced through the gathering like a bayonet. The vultures flinched as if the metal itself burned. Danny's mouth opened, a question forming, but Mac cut him off with a stare sharp enough to gut him on the spot. "You ever listen to your old man's stories?" Danny Mac asked, his tone deceptively calm, almost casual. Danny blinked. Yeah, sure. He used to talk about Fallujah, about the IED ambush." His voice trailed off. As the color drained from his face, the puzzle pieces finally snapping into place. Mac stepped closer to him, now pressing the dog tags into his chest. "He ever tell you who pulled him out of that ambush? Who carried his sorry ass half a mile through sniper fire to the medevac point?" The crowd held its collective breath. Danny looked from the tags to Evelyn, realization crashing over him like a tidal wave. His bravado dissolved into something raw and shaken. "No," Danny whispered, but the truth was already standing right in front of him. Mac answered for him, his voice a quiet sledgehammer. This woman did. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the bartenders inside had stopped pretending not to listen, their faces pressed against the glass. "That's right," Mac continued. "The woman you just filmed. The one you laughed at. The one whose groceries you stomped on like trash. She's the reason your daddy got to see your sorry face grow up." Danny's throat worked to form words, but none came. His eyes filled with something rare in that place, tears. Mac didn't let up. "You should be on your knees, boy," he growled, his tone low and dangerous. "All of you should." The bikers shifted in place, their boots scuffing against the concrete, but none dared move. Their pride kept them frozen, but their faces told the real story: humiliation, guilt, and a dawning sense that they had crossed a line they could never uncross. Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stood, her shoulders square, her chin high, as if she was back on the battlefield, daring anyone to look away first. The silence stretched, suffocating them all. Mac let it stew, let them sweat under the weight of their ignorance. Then, as if dropping the gavel on a courtroom, he barked, "Get your damn tools. We ain't done fixing what you broke." The bikers scrambled this time, no hesitation in their steps. Wrenches, chains, lubricants, anything to get their hands busy and avoid the crushing truth hanging in the air. Mac knew. They weren't just repairing a bicycle. They were repairing their shattered pride. But he wasn't about to let them off easy. He would make sure they understood that the real repair job was on themselves. And he wasn't done with them yet. Inside the Iron Vulture's bar, the atmosphere had mutated into something unnatural, foreign even to the club's most seasoned members. The raucous laughter, the blaring music, the constant shuffle of boots on sticky floors, all of it had been choked out by the weight of what just happened outside. Mac Dalton didn't need to say more. His commands had already turned the infamous biker gang into a silent assembly line of grim-faced mechanics. The pool table, usually reserved for arguments, beer stains, and broken cues, was cleared with a single sweep of Mac's massive arm. Balls clattered into pockets, the crash echoing like a gunshot in the hush that followed. The battered Schwinn was placed gently atop the green felt, transformed into an operating table under the glow of flickering neon lights. The bikers circled it like students around a cadaver, tools clutched in trembling hands, unsure where to start, but knowing they had no choice. Mac stood over them like a warden, his expression carved from stone, ensuring no one dared slouch, no one dared look away. Evelyn Hart didn't say a word. She stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the once mighty vultures stumble through basic repairs, their swagger replaced by awkward, clumsy movements. They worked without speaking, the air dense with the sound of metal on metal, the hiss of air pumps, the grind of wrenches against rusted bolts. A few of them knew their way around an engine, but a bicycle? It might as well have been a spaceship for how lost they looked. Still, no one dared step back. No one dared laugh. Every twist of a bolt, every replaced cable was an act of penance. They weren't just fixing a bike. They were trying to stitch back together the gaping wound they had carved into their own honor. Hooking up a new chain, rethreading brake cables, these weren't mechanical tasks anymore. They were confessions. Silent apologies offered through grease-stained fingers. The irony wasn't lost on Evelyn. She watched these self-proclaimed outlaws, these kings of the open road, fumble over themselves to make amends with tools that looked foreign in their hands. The tough guy image stripped away, they resembled recruits on their first day of boot camp, awkward, exposed, humbled. A biker with a graying beard and arms covered in faded ink muttered something about needing a specific wrench. Another darted outside, returning moments later with an entire toolkit, dumping it onto the floor like an offering. There was no more posturing, no more pretending. Even Danny Reynolds, the loudmouth from earlier, worked quietly, shoulders hunched as he scrubbed the grime from the frame with a rag that once probably wiped down his Harley. Mac hovered nearby, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, ensuring none of them slipped back into their old habits. He didn't bark orders anymore. His silence was punishment enough. Every move was a reminder of their failure. Every bead of sweat dripping onto the pool table, proof that the job was bigger than a busted bike. No one looked Evelyn in the eye. They couldn't. They weren't ready yet. They wouldn't be ready until they understood that the real damage wasn't on two wheels. It was in the mirror. Tools clanked against the table. Fresh cables replaced frayed ones. Bearings were cleaned and greased. The cracked seat was swapped out for a new one someone fetched from the parts shop across town. Bit by bit, the battered Schwinn was resurrected, not just restored to working condition, but transformed into something better, something worthy. But none of them dared call it fixed. Not yet. Not until they faced her properly. Evelyn knew this wasn't about charity. This wasn't about pity. It wasn't about the bike at all. She watched them work, measured, patient, understanding that sometimes the hardest lessons came not through words, but through sweat and silence. They were repairing metal, sure, but they were also welding back together the fractured code they had abandoned the second they had turned her into their plaything. Mac stood back, now letting them struggle, letting them stew in their awkward labor. He wanted them to feel every scratch, every stripped bolt, every drop of oil on their skin. They needed to wear this shame under their nails for days to come. Evelyn remained silent, letting them learn the lesson their own way. And she knew without a doubt they weren't fixing just a bicycle. They were trying to patch something much bigger. But that repair wouldn't be finished tonight. Not even close. The Schwinn gleamed under the flickering bar lights, no longer the battered wreck that had limped into the lot hours earlier. Its frame shone with a renewed purpose, its chain perfectly aligned, its gears whispering readiness. Yet the hush inside the Iron Vulture's clubhouse remained heavier than the Texas heat outside. The job looked done, but no one dared celebrate. Evelyn Hart stood motionless, her arms crossed, her face still as granite. She wasn't here for gratitude, and she sure as hell didn't need their approval. Across from her, the bikers shifted on their boots, every scuffed leather jacket hanging heavier, now their pride tangled in the oil-stained rags littering the floor. Mac Dalton broke the silence. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. His footsteps alone sent a current through the room as he disappeared into the back office, leaving behind a group of men and women who couldn't decide if they were more embarrassed or afraid. When he returned, the air seemed to thin even more. In his massive hands he carried not a wrench, not a chain, but a vest. Black leather, crisp stitching, no chapter name, no rank. Just the snarling emblem of the Iron Vultures embroidered on the back. And above it stitched in bold, defiant letters a single word: respect. The bikers stiffened as one. No outsider had ever worn the colors. That vest represented more than cloth and thread. It was family creed, brotherhood forged in road grime and scars. Mac held it like a holy relic, stopping directly in front of Evelyn. For a long, suffocating moment he said nothing, letting the weight of the gesture settle like dust on old bones. Then his voice came low, flat, no theatrics. "We don't hand these out to tourists," he said. "We don't hand them out at all." He unfolded the vest, the leather creaking as he held it open toward her. "But today, you're the only one in this room who deserves to wear it." The bikers swallowed hard, the humiliation cutting deeper than any words Mac could throw at them. Evelyn stared at the vest, saying nothing, her gaze flicking to Mac's face, searching for any sign of mockery. She found none. There was only steel, and something else. Recognition. She didn't reach for it immediately. She let the silence drag, forcing every eye in the bar to stay fixed on the scene they had created. When she finally accepted the vest, she did it with the same stoicism she'd worn all day. No ceremony, no words. She slipped it on the leather, settling over her battered shirt like it had always belonged there. It fit. Perfectly. As if it had been waiting for her all along. Around the room, the vultures stood frozen, some with clenched jaws, others with eyes darting to the floor, unable to confront the reality now draped across Evelyn's shoulders. She was no longer the old woman they'd tried to break. She was the only one in the bar every vulture had to look up to. Mac extended his hand, rough and scarred. Evelyn took it. Her grip, though weathered, carried the strength of every battlefield she had walked through, of every man she had pulled back from death's doorstep. Mac held her hand a beat longer than necessary, locking the moment in the memory of every person watching. When he finally let go, he turned to his crew, his face hardening again into the stone they feared. "You think we're done?" His voice dropped into that dangerous register that didn't invite argument. "This ain't just about fixing a bike. It's about fixing the town's memory. And tomorrow we're gonna make sure every son of a bitch at City Hall remembers who Evelyn Hart is." There was no applause, no cheers, only nods tight and grim. The lesson wasn't over. Not even close. Evelyn didn't smile. She simply stood taller, the vest hugging her frame, her back straighter than it had been in years. She understood what Mac was doing. He wasn't done with them, and he wasn't done with this town. The bike was only the beginning. The real ride was coming. And when it did, The people who had turned away from her would have no choice but to look her in the eye. The rumble of the engines rolled through Main Street like a thunderclap, shattering the sleepy stillness of the late morning. Evelyn Hart sat upright on her Schwinn, the polished leather vest snug against her back, the word respect glinting in the sunlight like a warning flare. Flanked on both sides, the iron vultures rolled behind her in formation, 20 motorcycles, deep, chrome snarling pipes, growling, their notorious insignias blazing against black leather. It wasn't a parade. It wasn't a protest. It was something in between. And no one in town had seen anything like it before. Storefronts froze. Windows filled with faces. Phones rose in hands trying to capture what felt like an intrusion into their quiet routines. Evelyn's legs pumped the pedals at a steady pace, the freshly repaired Schwinn, moving smoother than she ever remembered. But this wasn't about the bike anymore. This was about forcing the town to see her, to recognize what they'd ignored, what they'd let fester right under their noses. And behind her, Mac Dalton led his crew like an honor guard no one had asked for, but no one dared challenge. They rolled through intersections without stopping, without signaling the roars of their engines enough to make traffic scatter to the curbs. By the time they reached the town square, the crowd had swelled, whispers rippling through the streets like wildfire. Old men from the VFW stood on porches, jaws tight, eyes narrowed. The courthouse clerks peeked through the blinds, their faces pale. City officials emerged slowly, like bugs from under a flipped rock, blinking at the unexpected daylight. The iron vultures made their statement without banners, without speeches. They parked in formation, blocking the main steps of the courthouse. Evelyn rolled to the front, her Schwinn stopping dead center, wheels crunching on the decorative pavers. The town's seal, once proudly displayed underfoot, now sat beneath the battered tires of a woman they'd refused to acknowledge. Evelyn dismounted slowly, letting the silence build, letting the discomfort stew. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The crowd saw everything they needed in the leather vest, the hard line of her shoulders, the battered bike standing taller than any Harley in that lineup. The same woman they had walked past in grocery aisles, ignored, at town meetings, looked through on the sidewalks, she now stood at the heart of their civic temple, and they had no choice but to face her. Mac Dalton stepped forward now, his presence sending ripples through the assembly, like a stone into still water. His arms folded across his chest, his sunglasses reflecting the mirrored windows of the courthouse. "Well," he said, his voice carrying without effort, "y'all forgot someone, didn't you?" No one answered. No one had the guts. Mac let the silence linger, letting the humiliation sink into their bones. City council members shifted uncomfortably on the courthouse steps. The sheriff, who had ignored the bikers until now, finally emerged, hands on his belt, trying to play the part of authority. But the iron vultures outnumbered him, and the look in Mac's eyes told him today was not the day to test the line. "This is Evelyn Hart," Mac continued, his voice flat, unshaken. "Served in Iraq. Saved lives while the rest of you were home safe in your beds. You walked past her. You let her struggle. You let her get mocked in your streets." The crowd stared, awkward, exposed, knowing he was right, but unable to hide behind their usual excuses. "That ends today." Mac's words settled over the square like dust after a demolition. Evelyn said nothing. She didn't need to. The townsfolk saw her now, not the aging woman on a bike, but the soldier, the warrior, the survivor. There was no ceremony, no speeches, no apologies offered. Just the raw, undeniable truth laid bare on the courthouse steps for everyone to see. The iron vultures revved their engines in unison, the roar drowning out the murmurs, forcing the town to confront the power imbalance they'd ignored for too long. Mac let the engines scream for a few beats longer, then raised his hand, cutting the noise into dead silence. His message was clear. They weren't here for a show. They were here to make sure no one forgot again. Evelyn mounted her bike without a word, her gaze locked forward, never looking back. The vultures fell in behind her, the parade of chrome and thunder rolling out of the square, leaving behind a stunned crowd that wouldn't be able to wash the image from their minds. Mac had made his point, but he wasn't finished yet. The town had seen the show. Now it was time to carve the lesson into stone. The next morning broke heavy and humid, the kind of Texas heat that clung to your skin like guilt. But for the first time in years, Evelyn Hart woke to something different. She rose before sunrise, her routine as disciplined as ever, and pushed her repaired Schwinn onto the sidewalk. The bike rolled smooth now, but she wasn't headed to the grocery store today. She didn't need to. Her pantry was full, her freezer stocked courtesy of an anonymous delivery that arrived after sundown. No note, no explanation, though she could guess. Instead, she pedaled toward the Iron Vulture's clubhouse, her legs steady, her breath even. She expected the place to be empty. It wasn't. They were already there waiting. Mac Dalton and his crew had been working since first light. Trucks lined the lot, tools scattered across the asphalt grinders, and drills buzzing as sparks flew against the old cinder block walls of the bar. It wasn't repairs this time. It was something else, something permanent. Evelyn dismounted at the edge of the lot, watching from the shadows, as Mac directed the installation of a massive brass plaque. It gleamed in the harsh morning sun, bolted into the brick facade beside the bar's main entrance. It wasn't small. It wasn't subtle. The letters were carved deep, impossible to miss even from the road. Respect is earned and remembered. Underneath the inscription, smaller but no less bold, were the words, "In honor of all veterans forgotten by the world they protected." Evelyn stood still, her hands resting on the handlebars, saying nothing, as the bikers wiped sweat from their faces, their shirts dark with labor, their silence louder than any speech they could have given. They didn't look at her. They didn't have to. They weren't doing it for praise. They were doing it because Mac had made it clear this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the ones the town had turned away, the ones lost in alleyways and under bridges, the ones with medals gathering dust in drawers, while the world forgot their names. This plaque wasn't an apology. It was a correction. It was a line drawn in steel and brass, daring anyone to ignore it. And it wasn't just the bikers who noticed. The townspeople, still rattled from the spectacle in the square, drifted toward the bar in cautious clusters, whispering, gawking, snapping photos from across the street. The mayor drove by twice, never stopping, but lingering long enough to make it clear he'd seen the plaque. The sheriff parked at the corner, but stayed in his cruiser engine, running as if ready to flee if things got uncomfortable. They didn't approach Evelyn. No one did. But they saw her. For the first time in years, they saw her. And she made sure they had no choice but to keep seeing her. She stepped forward, slow, deliberate, the vest on her back, announcing her presence louder than any words could. Mac noticed her then, giving her a nod, nothing more. That was enough. The bikers stepped back, clearing a path, letting her stand alone before the plaque. She read it once. Then again, letting the words sink into her bones. They didn't erase what had happened. Nothing could. But they carved something permanent into the town's skin, something that would outlast the paint on the doors and the whispers in the alleys. Evelyn reached out her fingertips, brushing the cool brass. The metal vibrated faintly under her touch, alive with the energy of the hands that had installed it. She let her hand linger there, knowing the plaque wasn't just for her. It was for every soldier left behind, every name forgotten, every face passed by on the street. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The plaque said everything she wanted. Around her, the bikers stood in silent formation, their usual grins absent. Their hands folded, their eyes locked on the words they'd engraved into their home. This was their reckoning, their redemption, and they owned it. The townsfolk watching from a distance wouldn't be able to pretend this hadn't happened. Not now. Not with the plaque gleaming like a mirror reflecting back their own complicity. Evelyn turned, mounting her bike again, nodding once to Mac as she pedaled past the line of motorcycles. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She knew they'd stand there until she was gone from sight. The town had seen her. But more importantly, the town had seen itself. And Mac Dalton wasn't going to let them forget. He had plans for that plaque. Plans that would make sure no one in this dusty corner of Texas could ever look away again. The plaque didn't need a spotlight. It gleamed on its own burning gold under the unforgiving Texas sun, a permanent reminder to anyone who dared walk past the Iron Vulture's stronghold. But Mac Dalton knew metal alone wouldn't keep the town's memory sharp. It needed something more, something living. That's how the ritual began. It didn't start with an announcement. There was no official declaration, no votes taken at the clubhouse table. It just happened. The day after the plaque went up, Evelyn Hart rode past the bar on her usual route. She didn't stop. She didn't wave. She pedaled by like she always had, quiet, steady, invisible to most. But not to them. The first time the bikers saw her coming, engines already rumbling in the lot. One by one they killed the noise. Switches flicked, pipes cooled, helmets came off. Leather-cut jackets were straightened not in defiance, but in reverence. By the time Evelyn crossed in front of the bar, the Iron Vultures stood at rigid attention. Boots lined up on the cracked concrete arms behind their backs, eyes forward. They didn't speak. They didn't nod. They didn't even blink. They stood silent as stone, letting their bodies do the talking. Evelyn noticed, of course. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, never breaking pace, never acknowledging them. That wasn't the point. The gesture wasn't for her to accept. It was for them to offer without expecting anything in return. No words were exchanged, no explanations whispered. The ritual just stuck. The next day the same, and the day after that. It became an unspoken rule. When Evelyn rode by, the vultures stopped everything. Tools were dropped, music silenced, conversations halted mid-sentence. Whether there were 2 of them or 20, the response was the same. Stand, respect. Not because they were ordered to, because they understood now. The townsfolk noticed, of course. They whispered about it behind hands, behind curtains at the diner counter. Some rolled their eyes, others looked away in discomfort. But they couldn't unsee it. The woman they'd ignored for years now commanded the kind of attention no mayor, no sheriff, no preacher ever did. And she did it without saying a word. Evelyn never altered her routine. She pedaled her repaired Schwinn along Main Street, past the courthouse, past the coffee shop, past the Iron Vulture's clubhouse. Head-high pace, steady. She didn't speed up. She didn't slow down. She didn't need to. She knew they'd be waiting, every time. Rain or shine. The ritual never slipped. It wasn't for show. It wasn't for the cameras. It wasn't for the town's approval. It was something deeper. An understanding carved in silence, welded in shared recognition of something no plaque could capture. Evelyn didn't let herself smile at it. Not at first. But the weight she carried, the armor she wore every time she stepped into town, began to feel lighter. She didn't need anyone to tell her she belonged. The Iron Vultures told her in the only way that mattered, with actions, with presence, with discipline. And the town. It was starting to shift, slowly, reluctantly, but undeniably. More eyes followed her now. Fewer whispers trailed behind her back. The checkout girl at Wilson's no longer looked through her. The hardware store clerk no longer rushed her out the door. It wasn't gratitude. Not yet. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. And for a woman like Evelyn Hart, who had spent years invisible, that was enough. The vultures kept the ritual alive without fail. Sometimes it was just Mac alone, standing on the porch, arms crossed, boots planted. Other days the entire crew lined the lot, their helmets at their sides, their engines silent, their heads tilted slightly forward as she passed. They didn't need to say they were sorry. They showed it. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They earned it one quiet day at a time. Evelyn knew now she wasn't pedaling alone. She wasn't fighting ghosts anymore. The road that once felt endless, empty, and different was no longer hers to travel in isolation. She had company. Unexpected, rough-edged, imperfect company. But company nonetheless. She didn't have to look back to feel them there, watching over her in the only way they knew how. With silence, with stillness, with respect. And for the first time in a long, long time, Evelyn let herself believe it. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer alone. Evelyn Hart didn't change her route. She didn't buy a newer bike or switch to a smoother road. She didn't swap her faded cap for something shinier, nor did she suddenly expect the town to roll out a carpet every time she passed. She didn't need to. She simply kept pedaling. Through the same streets, past the same faces. But the streets weren't the same anymore. Neither were the faces. They still whispered. But the words had changed. They still stared. But now the stares held something different. Weight, aware of their own hesitation, aware of her presence in a way they hadn't been before. Evelyn didn't slow down to acknowledge them. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just rode. The respect vest on her back did all the talking. And that was enough. The girl at the pharmacy who once double-scanned her purchases now held the door open when she saw Evelyn approach. The teenager who once giggled behind the counter at the coffee shop stopped mid-sentence when Evelyn locked eyes with her. Even the mayor's secretary, who used to shuffle her papers pointedly whenever Evelyn walked by the town hall, now gave a stiff nod, barely able to hold Evelyn's gaze. She didn't need to tell them her story. She didn't need to list the places she'd been, the lives she'd saved, the blood she'd spilled while they were safe at home. The way she rode was enough. The way she held herself. The way the iron vultures dropped everything the moment she crossed their path. That was the only story the town needed, and it echoed louder than any parade. She had become something no speech could create, no social post could fake. She was the town's living, breathing reminder of what they'd chosen not to see for far too long. She was the woman who made them pause, who made them think twice before dismissing someone because of a limp, a threadbare coat, a tired face. She didn't preach. She didn't lecture. She simply kept showing up. Every day. Same path, same pace, same quiet command of every inch of sidewalk she rolled over. It wasn't about the bike anymore. It wasn't even about the vest. It was about how she carried both. She didn't need to tell the town she had nothing left to prove. They figured it out on their own. They figured it out every time the vultures cut their engines and lined up like a private honor guard. Every time the town kids stopped playing to stand and watch her pass. Every time the sheriff lowered his hat but said nothing. Evelyn didn't change the town with speeches. She did it by living. And that living spoke volumes more than all their empty words ever could. The whispers became murmurs of respect. The stares turned into hesitant nods. Doors that once closed when she approached now stayed open, though no one dared step in her way. The diner stopped calling her that old woman with the bike. Now she was just Evelyn. Everyone knew her. Everyone saw her. No banners, no headlines. Just a quiet shift that settled into the bones of the town like old scars finally acknowledged. She was still alone on her bike. But now she wasn't invisible. She didn't need a crowd. She didn't need an entourage. She didn't need a podium. She was the message. And the town couldn't unsee it. Couldn't ignore it. Couldn't forget. It wasn't just Main Street anymore. It was the gas station on the edge of town, where the attendant who once rolled his eyes now rushed to open the pump for her. It was the grocery store where a clerk once snickered at her coupons and now double-bagged her items without being asked. It was the children who once jeered and now stood in silence, hats in hand, when they saw her approach. Respect wasn't something you shouted about. Evelyn Hart showed them that. It was something you carried, something you wore in the way you held your head, in the way you faced the world, no matter how many times it tried to erase you. She didn't need their ceremonies. She didn't want them. The way she lived was her ceremony, and that was enough. But the change didn't stop with her. She could feel it seeping into the sidewalks, the storefronts, the homes. The cracks were showing. The town was looking at itself now, and Mac Dalton had no intention of letting them look away. The iron vultures didn't change overnight. They didn't hang up their cuts or soften their edges. They didn't trade in their Harleys for charity drives. But the town noticed something shift. Slowly, quietly, and undeniably. It started with small things. The vultures once feared for their chaos began showing up in places no one expected them. They didn't ask permission. They didn't make announcements. They just started being there. When a homeless veteran was pushed off the library steps one night the next morning, the vultures were parked there, engines' cold arms crossed, daring anyone to try it again. No words exchanged, no threats made. Just presence. When an aging Marine was found sleeping behind the shuttered gas station on Route 9, he woke to find Mac Dalton standing over him, offering a meal, a ride, and a place to crash at the clubhouse. No strings, no questions. The town called it a PR stunt at first. They said the vultures were playing hero for attention. But weeks turned into months, and the actions never stopped. No speeches, no cameras, just quiet, persistent acts of defense for those no one else wanted to see. They called it the Wall. It wasn't on any map. It wasn't listed in any tourist brochure. But the respect wall behind the Iron Vultures bar became a living monument. It started with Evelyn's plaque, but it grew quickly. Dog tags, patches, faded photos, names scrawled in shaky handwriting, veterans from all over town, and eventually from other towns left their marks there. Some stayed for a beer, others for a meal, some just needed to know they hadn't been erased. The vultures let them. No questions, no conditions. The wall became sacred ground. Fights that once erupted in the bar stopped cold when someone approached the wall. It didn't matter who they were. Everyone stopped. Everyone stood. It became the vultures' new creed. You didn't mess with the wall. You didn't mess with those who had earned their place on it. Mac made sure of that. And the town slowly, reluctantly began to see the vultures in a different light. They weren't the outlaws anymore. They were the sentinels, the guardians of the forgotten, the ones who stood where no one else would. It wasn't about forgiveness. Mac didn't care if the town forgave them. They weren't looking for redemption in the eyes of the council or the church. Their redemption came in the form of silent respect, of engines cut when Evelyn passed, of boots planted when a veteran crossed the street, of helmets removed when the wall was visited. The rituals hardened into tradition. The townsfolk didn't question it anymore. They learned to live with it. They learned to live with the fact that the people they once called monsters were now the ones holding the line. The sheriff stopped pretending to look the other way when the vultures parked outside the bus station watching over the runaways and the lost souls drifting into town. The diner stopped complaining when bikers took up a whole row of booths, their presence ensuring no drunk with a grudge harassed the old veterans sipping black coffee. Mac didn't need their thanks. Neither did his crew. They didn't wear hero badges. They wore grease and grit and the scars of the road. They didn't soften their voices or clean up their language. They didn't sanitize themselves for public consumption. They stayed who they were. But now who they were mattered. They had become the shield, the town's accidental protectors, the wall that stood between the invisible and the indifferent. And at the center of that transformation was Evelyn Hart. She never asked to be the symbol, but she became the thread that stitched the vultures into the fabric of the community, whether they wanted it or not. Or she was the reason the wall existed, the reason the rituals held firm, the reason no one dared ignore the veterans anymore. Mac knew it. His crew knew it. And even if the town never admitted it out loud, they knew it too. Evelyn Hart had done what no councilman, no preacher, no badge had ever done. She made the town look at itself. And the vultures made damn sure it kept looking. Evelyn Hart never heard the words. No one in the Iron Vultures ever said them. Not Mac. Not his crew. Not the townsfolk watching from behind closed doors. The word thank you hung in the air unsaid, unnecessary. It wasn't part of their vocabulary, and Evelyn preferred it that way. She didn't trust easy words. They blew away in the wind. Actions were heavier. Actions stayed. She saw it in the way Mac Dalton nodded at her when she rolled past the bar, his chin dipping just enough for her to catch it, but never enough for anyone else to notice. She saw it in the way the vultures lined the sidewalk when she crossed the town square, boots, silent helmets tucked under arms, faces forward. They never spoke. They didn't clap. They didn't parade her like some mascot. They just stood, and she kept riding. That was their pact now. No speeches, no parades, just presence, just respect. When the new mayor called for a Veterans Day event and suggested putting Evelyn front and center, Mac shot it down before she even heard about it. "She doesn't need your stage," he told them. "She's got her own damn road." The mayor didn't argue. No one did. The vultures weren't looking to turn her into some photo op. They weren't building a brand. They were building a wall the town couldn't see, but would never again cross. Evelyn rolled through the days like she always had. Quiet, steady, invisible, only in the way that people respected her space now, not because they chose to ignore her. She understood the language Mac and his crew spoke, the kind built from decades of doing what no one else would, carrying burdens no one else wanted. She had carried those same loads, in war zones, in hospitals, in streets back home that didn't care. They didn't need to explain it to each other. They understood. There were no handshakes, no medals, no ceremonies, just the work, just the duty. And that was enough. The nights grew longer as summer bled into fall, but the vultures never missed a day. Whether it was 2 of them or 20, they showed up. They stood. They watched. They protected those no one else would. Evelyn never told them to stop. She never told them to continue either. It wasn't about her, not anymore. It was about what they had become together, a silent line that the town now recognized, whether they admitted it or not. Some days she passed without making eye contact. Some days she caught Mac's gaze, a flicker of understanding passing between them like static in the heavy air. No words spoken, no words needed, no words. The town slowly learned to live with it. They learned to live with the discomfort of their own reflection in Evelyn's quiet ride down their streets. And they learned to live with the fact that the people they'd once called misfits and monsters were now the ones standing between them and their own apathy. Evelyn didn't change her pace. She didn't change her route. She didn't change herself. She didn't need to. The vultures adjusted around her. The town bent itself into new shapes, shapes where silence carried more meaning than any proclamation from the courthouse steps. Mac understood it better than anyone. He understood that men like him, women like Evelyn, they didn't want the spotlight. They didn't want the town's awkward apologies. They wanted someone to stand beside them when the darkness got too close. And Mac Dalton had chosen his side, quietly, permanently, without needing to be asked. Evelyn accepted it without nod, without word. It was enough that when she pedaled past the bar, the engines cut, the conversation stopped, and the vultures stood. Every time. Without fail. That was how they said it. That was how they kept saying it, and she heard it loud and clear. She carried that silence with her down every street, every alley, every cracked sidewalk, in a town that had finally painfully learned how to look her in the eye. She was still the same woman who fought in wars they couldn't pronounce, who carried men through fires they couldn't imagine, who slept on floors they'd never see. But now she carried it lighter, not because the weight had lessened, but because for the first time in a long time she wasn't carrying it alone. And so she kept riding, free, quiet, as she had always done, as she always would. The road didn't change. The cracks in the asphalt still split the same way they always had. The storefronts still peeled under the weight of too many summers. The same sagging porches leaned into the same empty streets. But Evelyn Hart had changed. Or maybe finally the town had caught up to her. She rode the same route every morning past the post office, the diner, the courthouse, the bar. She didn't need to vary her path. She didn't need to claim new territory. The streets were already hers now, not because anyone handed them over, but because she had taken them the only way she knew how. 1 mile at a time. 1 day at a time. 1 silent ride at a time. She never craved fame. She never posted a single photo. She wasn't a story told in headlines or paraded on stages. She was a story whispered in the small spaces, in the nod of a grizzled biker as she passed, in the quiet salute of an old Marine standing at the hardware store counter, in the eyes of the kids who once laughed, and now stood straight hats over hearts when they saw her coming. She didn't need the world's applause. She had the streets under her tires, the wind in her face, the respect she carried like a second skin. And in the town of faded paint and faded memories, that was enough. More than enough. She passed the Iron Vulture's clubhouse like clockwork. The engines silenced. The helmets came off. The men and women who once mocked her now stood still, boots-lined backs, straight every eye forward. No one spoke. No one dared. She kept riding. She didn't need to look back to know they held their post until she was long out of sight. That was the deal now. That was the ritual. It had become part of the town's rhythm, just as Evelyn's presence had become part of its fabric. She was more than the woman on the bike. She was the reminder, the lesson carved into concrete and brass. The line no one crossed anymore. And she carried that not like a burden, but like a banner, unseen, unspoken, undeniable. She rolled past the kids playing stickball on the empty lot. They stopped mid-swing, stepping aside, letting her pass hats pulled low over their brows. She rolled past the sheriff's cruiser idling on the corner. He dipped his head. She didn't return it. She didn't need to. She rolled past the mayor's office, the blinds snapping closed just a little too late to hide the faces peeking through. She never acknowledged them. The road stretched ahead, empty, endless, familiar. And she owned every inch of it. Not because they gave it to her, but because she took it. That was the truth. No plaque could tell, no mayor could spin. Respect wasn't given. It wasn't handed out in ceremonies or social media posts. It was earned, and it always found the ones who deserved it most. Evelyn Hart didn't chase it. She never had. She simply kept riding, kept living, kept showing them how it was done. That was all it took. She was the living proof that sometimes the most powerful statement wasn't a speech or a fight. It was simply showing up, every day, without fail, on the same roads, in the same silence. She didn't need them to clap for her. She needed them to remember. And they did. The Iron Vultures saw to that. The plaque on the clubhouse wall saw to that. The rituals, the cut engines, the silent lines of boots on the sidewalk saw to that. The town couldn't erase what she'd become. She was their reflection now, their measure, their conscience. She wasn't just the woman on the bike anymore. She was the standard. And they felt it in their bones every time her tires hummed past their doors. Evelyn never chased a legacy, but somehow it chased her, and it clung to the streets long after her silhouette disappeared down the road. In the hush she left behind, in the stillness of the men who stood in her wake, in the quiet nods of the townsfolk who learned finally to look her in the eye. Her story didn't end with a parade. It didn't end at all. It just kept rolling like her bike on those cracked roads. Because respect once earned never fades. It lives in the spaces between words, in the moments of silence, in the eyes that lower not in shame anymore, but in recognition. And in that small, powerful pause, the town now offered her every single day. And maybe that's the part we often forget. That respect isn't something loud or flashy. It doesn't need a stage, a banner, or a crowd to mean something. It lives in the quiet rituals, in the eyes that finally dare to meet yours, in the road you choose to take every day even when no one's watching. Evelyn Hart never asked to be seen. She never needed the applause. But in a town that once looked away, she became the reflection they couldn't escape, a mirror they couldn't avoid. And through her, even the hardest hearts like the Iron Vultures learned that real strength isn't about who shouts the loudest. It's about who shows up day after day without expecting a damn thing in return. So maybe the next time you pass someone who's been invisible for too long, you'll ask yourself, what would happen if we all stopped pretending not to see? What if we showed up not with speeches, but with actions? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think respect once lost can be earned back? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story of quiet strength and second chances moved, you don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to me. Because sometimes the loudest heroes are the ones who never say a word.